The moment my foot slipped, I understood how fragile a lifetime really is. 1 second, I was breathing in pine-scented air, holding my husband's hand as we walked the narrow mountain path. The next, the ground vanished beneath us, and the sky spun so wildly I couldn't tell where heaven ended and earth began. I remember the sound first, not a scream, but a sharp, stunned silence that swallowed everything as we fell. They say your life flashes before your eyes. Mine didn't. What flashed was my son's face, the same face I had kissed goodbye on his first day of school, the same eyes that once searched for me in crowded rooms, and now those eyes had looked at me without hesitation. I don't know how long we rolled. It could have been seconds or a lifetime. When my body finally stopped moving, pain arrived like a heavy blanket, settling into every bone. My cheek was pressed against cold stone. Blood tasted like pennies in my mouth. I wanted to cry out, to call my son's name like I used to when he scraped his knee as a boy. But before I could, I heard footsteps above us, careful ones, retreating ones. I forced my eyes open just enough to see shadows moving at the edge of the cliff. 2 figures stood there, peering down as if checking whether an unwanted chore was finished. My daughter-in-law's voice floated down first, thin and tight. "Do you think?" she asked. There was a pause. Then my son answered. Calm, controlled, not the voice of a frightened man, but of someone finishing a decision he'd already made. "They won't survive that." My heart didn't break. It went still. They didn't rush to help. They didn't shout for rescue. I heard gravel shift as they turned away, their steps growing lighter, freer, as if a burden had been lifted from their shoulders. That was when I felt my husband's fingers brush against mine. Ever so gently. Barely there. Then his lips moved close to my ear, warm breath against my skin, and he whispered words I will carry with me for the rest of my days. "Don't move," he said. "Pretend we're dead." I didn't understand then. My mind was too busy screaming questions. Why would our own child do this? What kind of secret requires such silence? What had we seen or known that made us so dangerous? But my husband's grip tightened just enough to ground me. After 52 years of marriage, I knew that touch. It wasn't fear. It was resolve. So I lay still. I slowed my breathing. I let the pain burn quietly. I listened as the mountains swallowed their footsteps, and the world returned to an eerie, aching quiet. Above us, the sky looked impossibly blue, as if nothing terrible had happened at all. And lying there, broken and bleeding, I realized something that chilled me more than the cold stone beneath my body. Our fall wasn't an accident, and whatever truth my husband was hiding, it was powerful enough to make our own son want us gone forever. And as I lay there, pretending to be dead, I knew surviving the fall would be the easy part. The hardest part about pretending to be dead is not the stillness, it's the waiting. Every instinct in my body screamed to move, to reach for my husband, to call for help. My leg throbbed with a deep, pulsing pain that felt wrong, like something had shifted where it shouldn't have. Each breath scraped my chest, but I stayed still because my husband had never asked me for anything lightly in all our years together. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time behaves strangely when you're lying between life and whatever comes next. The mountain was quiet in a way that felt intentional, as if it too was holding its breath. Somewhere far above, a bird cried out. Wind moved through the trees like a whispering crowd. I focused on those sounds, letting them anchor me, because if I focused on the pain, I knew I'd lose control. My husband squeezed my fingers again, just once. They're gone, he murmured, barely moving his lips. But stay still a little longer. I wanted to ask him 100 questions. Why would our son do this? What had changed so deeply that love turned into calculation? But my husband's voice carried something heavier than fear, something practiced, like he had been preparing for this moment. When he finally shifted, it was slow and deliberate. He checked my breathing, brushed dirt from my face with hands that trembled despite his calm voice. You're alive, he said softly. That's what matters right now. I tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. I thought we were just going for a walk, I whispered. So did they, he replied. Then, after a pause, at least, that's what they wanted us to believe. That was the first crack in the story I thought I knew. He scanned the cliff above us, then the path below, calculating angles and shadows like a man measuring risk. He tore a strip of fabric from his sleeve and wrapped it around my bleeding arm with surprising steadiness. You need to listen to me, he said, leaning close. And you need to trust that what I'm about to say will sound impossible. I nodded, my heart pounding louder than the pain. Our son didn't do this because of anger, he continued, or money, or some sudden madness. I swallowed hard. Then why? He hesitated, eyes fixed on the trees swaying above us. Because he was told to. Those words settled into me like ice. Told by who? I asked. My husband didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket with careful fingers and pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. He turned it toward me, shielding it from the light. There were messages, dates, names I didn't recognize, and one sentence repeated over and over, sent from a number without a contact name. Make it look like an accident. My mouth went dry. We found out something we weren't meant to, my husband said quietly. About the land, about what's buried near this mountain, about who really owns it. I stared at the screen, my thoughts racing faster than my body could keep up. So they thought if we were gone, the truth would stay buried, he finished. In the distance, I heard something faint. Not wind, not birds, voices. My husband's eyes sharpened. Help is coming, he said. But what happens next will be far more dangerous than this fall. He closed his hand over mine and added, because surviving means they'll know we're still a problem. And as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, I realized the mountain hadn't tried to kill us. People had. And the moment we were found, the real danger would begin. Being found should have felt like salvation. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something far more frightening. The voices grew clearer, two hikers, judging by the sound of uneven steps and hurried whispers. One of them gasped when they saw us below, their shock echoing down the cliff like a warning bell. Oh my God, they're alive. I wanted to cry. I wanted to wave. But my husband squeezed my hand again, just slightly this time, a reminder to stay measured. Panic makes people careless, and carelessness had nearly cost us our lives already. The rescue team arrived faster than I expected. Someone called out instructions. Ropes were lowered. A calm voice told me to focus on breathing, on the sky, on staying awake. I did as I was told, but my eyes kept drifting to my husband. He was watching everything, not with fear, but with calculation. As they strapped me into the harness, he leaned close and whispered, "Say nothing, not yet." I didn't understand why silence still mattered. We were injured. We were victims. Surely the truth needed air. But then I saw it. Up on the path, beyond the flashing lights and concerned faces, two familiar figures stood frozen in place, my son and his wife. Their faces were drained of color, not grief, not relief, fear. My daughter-in-law's hands trembled as she clutched her phone. My son looked like a man who had seen a ghost, and in a way he had. He met my eyes for half a second, then looked away, just like he used to when he was a boy caught in a lie. That was when it hit me. They hadn't stayed to help because they thought we were dead. They had left because they thought we were supposed to be. At the hospital, doctors came and went. A fractured rib, a deep gash on my arm, bruising that would bloom into painful colors over the coming days. Pain medication dulled the edges, but it couldn't touch the storm inside my chest. My son came into the room that evening, alone. He sat stiffly in the chair by the door, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. He asked how I was. His voice sounded practiced, like he'd rehearsed concern in the mirror. I answered politely, carefully. Not once did he apologize. Not once did he ask how we'd fallen. And that silence told me more than words ever could. After he left, my husband finally spoke. "Now you see why we couldn't talk before." I nodded slowly. "They weren't surprised," I said. "They were scared." He closed his eyes, the weight of years pressing down on his face. "We stumbled onto something big," he said. "Something that involves people who don't forgive mistakes or witnesses." I thought of the message on his phone. Make it look like an accident. "What do we do now?" I asked. My husband looked at me, and for the first time since the fall, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. "Now," he said, "we pretend everything is normal." I laughed softly, a hollow sound. "After this, especially after this," he replied, "because the moment they know we're not afraid, they'll make sure we don't get a second chance." That night, lying in a hospital bed with machines humming beside me, I realized something that made sleep impossible. The fall wasn't the end of their plan. It was only the beginning. And if we wanted to survive what came next, we would have to play a role neither of us had ever imagined: smiling parents, pretending not to know the truth about our own child. Going home felt stranger than the fall itself. Our house looked the same, white curtains fluttering gently in the open windows, the familiar creak of the front step, the smell of old wood and coffee that had soaked into the walls over decades. It should have comforted me. Instead, it felt like walking onto a stage where the script had already been written by someone else. My son insisted on driving us home from the hospital. He talked too much about traffic, about work, about how lucky we were. Lucky. I watched his hands on the steering wheel, steady, confident, not the hands of a man burdened by guilt. I wondered when exactly he had learned how to hide his feelings so well, or if I had simply refused to see it before. My husband played his part perfectly. He thanked our son, joked lightly, even patted his shoulder once, like nothing had changed. I admired that strength. I feared it too. That first night back, I didn't sleep. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. A car door closing outside made my heart race. The soft hum of the refrigerator sounded like footsteps. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying my husband's words over and over. We pretend everything is normal. The next morning, my daughter-in-law came by with soup. She stood in the kitchen, carefully avoiding eye contact, offering help that felt more like surveillance than kindness. Her smile never reached her eyes. "We were so worried," she said softly, "when you didn't come back from the hike." I stirred the soup slowly. "Worried enough to leave?" I asked gently. She froze, just for a second. Then she laughed nervously. "We thought you went ahead of us." My husband looked up from his newspaper. "We didn't," he said calmly. Silence filled the room. She left soon after, claiming an appointment she hadn't mentioned before. The door closed behind her with a finality that made my chest tighten. "They're watching us," I whispered once she was gone. My husband nodded. "And waiting." That afternoon, he finally told me more. Not everything, just enough to understand the shape of the danger. Years ago, he had helped consult on a land assessment near the mountain. What seemed like a routine job had uncovered irregular ownership records, hidden transfers, and connections to people who preferred shadows over daylight. When he tried to step away quietly, someone noticed. And then our son married into a family with very specific interests. "It wasn't supposed to touch us," my husband said, "but once you know something, you become a liability." I thought of the message again. Make it look like an accident. "They wanted us gone before we could talk," I said. "Yes," he replied, "and now they're unsure what we know." That night, my phone buzzed with a message from my son. "Let us help you rest. You shouldn't be alone after something like this." I showed it to my husband. He didn't hesitate. "We say no." The next move would matter. Every word, every smile, every refusal. Because the truth had already cost us nearly everything. And if we made the wrong choice now, it could cost us our lives. As I turned off the light, I realized the mountain had tested our bodies, but the days ahead would test our hearts. Fear doesn't always announce itself with shaking hands or racing breaths. Sometimes it arrives quietly disguised as politeness. In the days that followed, our son called often, too often. Each message sounded caring, reasonable, even loving. He asked about my pain. He reminded me to take my medication. He offered to run errands, to fix things around the house, to keep an eye on us. Every offer felt like a question he already knew the answer to. My husband and I developed a rhythm of silence. We spoke in half sentences, finished each other's thoughts with glances. 50 years of marriage had trained us well for this kind of quiet coordination. At night, when the house finally settled, we whispered plans like children afraid of being overheard. "We need proof," I said one evening, my voice barely louder than the ticking clock. "We need time," my husband replied. Time was the one thing we weren't sure we had. 2 days later, a stranger came to the door. He introduced himself as a representative from an insurance company, concerned about our accident, eager to help. His suit was too neat, his smile too practiced. "I just need to ask a few questions," he said, stepping slightly closer than necessary. My husband stood beside me, calm as stone. "Our lawyer will handle all communication," he said politely. The man's eyes flickered, just once, but I saw it. That night, my husband showed me something he'd been keeping hidden. A small folder tucked behind old photo albums in the closet. Inside were documents, copies of emails, notes written in his careful handwriting. "I didn't want to scare you," he said, "but you deserve to know now." I read slowly, my hands trembling. The names, the dates, the connections. And there it was, my son's signature on a document I knew he'd never mentioned. "He signed this," I whispered. My husband nodded. He was already involved when we found out. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, but completely. I thought of bedtime stories, of scraped knees, of late-night talks when he was a teenager, convinced the world was against him. I had believed love was stronger than influence, stronger than fear. I was wrong. The next morning, my daughter-in-law called. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. "We're planning a small family dinner," she said. "Just us. I think it would help everyone heal." I looked at my husband. He shook his head slowly. "We'll think about it," I said. After I hung up, I sank into the chair by the window. My reflection stared back at me, older, bruised, but sharper than I'd ever been. "They're trying to isolate us," I said. "Yes," my husband replied, "and rush us." That afternoon, we made our decision. We wouldn't run, we wouldn't confront, and we wouldn't trust. Instead, we would do something far more dangerous. We would let them believe the fall had scared us into silence. Because the truth was this: the more comfortable people feel around you, the more they reveal. And as I watched the sun dip below the trees, I realized something that sent a chill through me. Our son didn't just want us gone. He wanted us quiet long enough for the truth to disappear forever, and the dinner invitation was only the beginning. The dinner invitation sat between us like a loaded question. For 3 days, we said nothing about it. We moved through the house carefully, as if the walls themselves might be listening. I washed dishes slowly. My husband read the same page of the newspaper over and over without turning it. Silence had become our safest language. On the 4th morning, he finally spoke. "We should go," he said. I looked up, startled. "You just said it was a trap." "It is," he replied calmly. "But traps only work when the prey panics." I knew what he meant. If we refused too many invitations, asked too many questions, or showed even a flicker of suspicion, they would adjust their plans. People like that always did. So we agreed to go. We would smile. We would thank them. We would act like shaken parents grateful for family support. That evening, my daughter-in-law opened the door with exaggerated warmth. Candles glowed on the table. Soft music played. Everything was carefully arranged to look comforting. Too comforting. My son hugged me longer than necessary. His arms were stiff, his breath shallow. He whispered, "I'm so glad you're okay, Mom." I almost believed him. Dinner unfolded politely. They talked about work, about weather, about nothing that mattered. I noticed how my daughter-in-law watched my husband when she thought no one else was looking, how my son flinched whenever my husband mentioned the mountain. Then came the moment they'd been waiting for. "You must still be in shock," my daughter-in-law said gently. "After something like that, people forget things, details." My husband smiled. "Some things, yes," he said. "Others become very clear." Her fork paused midair. I felt it then, the subtle shift. The air grew heavier. Conversations slowed. Each word weighed carefully. After dessert, my son suggested we move to the living room. He closed the curtains, locked the door. That's when I knew this wasn't just about silence. My daughter-in-law sat across from us, hands folded neatly in her lap. "We want to help protect you," she said. "But there are things you don't need to be involved in anymore." "Involved in what?" I asked softly. She exchanged a glance with my son. "Old matters, complicated ones." My husband leaned forward. "You mean the land near the mountain?" The color drained from their faces. "We know you survived," my son said quickly. "We're just asking you to let go, for everyone's sake." I felt my heart pound, but I kept my voice steady. "And if we don't?" Silence. Then my daughter-in-law smiled, a thin, careful smile. "Accidents can happen more than once." I reached for my husband's hand under the table. He squeezed back once. That was all the answer I needed. We stood to leave. No shouting, no threats, just two older people walking calmly toward the door. Behind us, I heard my son say my name, not urgently, not lovingly, warnedly. As we stepped outside into the cool night air, my husband whispered, "Now they know we remember." I looked back once at the warm lights glowing behind the curtains, and I understood something terrifying. They weren't trying to scare us anymore. They were trying to decide how far they'd have to go to finish what they started. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay awake, listening to my husband's breathing beside me, steady but alert, like a man who knew danger no longer knocked politely. Every shadow in the room seemed sharper. Every passing car outside sounded slower, deliberate. "They crossed a line tonight," I whispered. My husband didn't answer right away. Then softly, "They crossed it the moment they pushed us." By morning, he was already dressed, moving with quiet purpose. He had made a decision, while I lay there pretending to rest. "I'm going to make a call," he said. One I hoped I'd never have to make. The call went to a former colleague, someone from years ago. Someone who understood paperwork, land records, and the kind of people who bury problems instead of solving them. My husband spoke carefully, using phrases that sounded harmless to anyone listening. When he hung up, his face was pale but resolute. "We're not alone anymore." That afternoon, a car we didn't recognize passed our house twice, slowly, too slowly. I watched from behind the curtain, my heart pounding. "They're checking," I said. "Yes," my husband replied, "because they're nervous." The next move came sooner than we expected. My son arrived unannounced just before sunset. Alone this time. He stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets, eyes darting like a man rehearsing lies he hoped not to use. "I just wanted to talk," he said. We let him in. He sat on the edge of the chair, leaning forward, lowering his voice. "Things have gotten complicated," he began. "People are asking questions. You don't want to be part of that." I looked at him, really looked, at the familiar curve of his jaw, the faint scar on his eyebrow from a childhood fall. And suddenly, I felt very old. "You pushed us," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. "I didn't think you thought," my husband interrupted. "You thought we wouldn't survive." Silence fell like a dropped plate. My son's shoulders sagged. "I was told it was the only way," he whispered. "Told by whom?" I asked. He shook his head. "I can't say." "That's what makes you dangerous," my husband said evenly. "Not what you did, but who you chose to obey." Tears welled in my son's eyes, but they didn't move me the way they once would have. I had already cried for him on the mountain. "I don't want you hurt," he said. "Please, just let this go." I stood slowly, my body aching but my voice steady. "You don't ask forgiveness by threatening silence." He left without another word. That night, my husband received a message. Just 2 words. "They're moving." I stared at the screen, a cold realization settling in. The people behind this weren't waiting anymore, and the truth my husband had been protecting all these years was about to surface, whether we were ready or not. As I turned off the light, I knew the next few days would decide more than our future. The knock came just after dawn, not loud, not rushed. 3 slow taps measured, confident, as if whoever stood on our porch already knew we would open the door. My husband and I exchanged a look. No words were needed. We had been waiting for this. 2 men stood outside. Both wore plain jackets, no uniforms, no badges in sight. One was younger, his eyes alert and restless. The other was older, his face calm in the way only experience can teach. "Good morning," the older one said. "We're here about the incident on the mountain." My heart skipped, but my husband's voice remained steady. "You'll need to be more specific." They stepped inside without being invited. The younger man glanced around our living room, his gaze lingering on family photos, on the small signs of a quiet life. The older man stayed focused on my husband. "We know it wasn't an accident," he said plainly, "and we know you figured that out before it happened." I felt my breath catch. My husband nodded once. "Then you know why we stayed silent." The man studied him for a long moment. "We do, and we know who benefits from your silence." The younger man finally spoke. "Your son made some poor decisions." The words felt like stones dropped into my chest. "We're not here to protect him," the older man continued. "We're here because what you uncovered goes beyond family." He slid a folder onto the table. Inside were documents, maps, signatures, transfers, photographs of landmarkers I recognized from our hike. "This isn't just about ownership," he said. "It's about what was hidden there and who helped hide it." My husband closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "So it's finally catching up." "Yes," the man replied, "but only if you're willing to speak." Silence filled the room. I thought of the mountain, the fall, the whisper, "Pretend we're dead." That lie had saved us once. But this required something else entirely. "What happens to our son?" I asked. The older man met my gaze, not unkindly. "That depends on what he's willing to tell us." After they left, the house felt unbearably quiet. "We can't protect him anymore," I said softly. My husband reached for my hand. "We already tried. It nearly killed us." That afternoon, we received a message from my daughter-in-law. Just one sentence. "You should have stayed quiet." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. "They know," I whispered. "Yes," my husband said, "and they're afraid." As evening settled in, I realized something that brought an unexpected calm. For the first time since the fall, we weren't running. We weren't hiding. The truth was no longer ours alone to carry, and whatever came next, loss, betrayal, or justice, we would finally face it standing up. Because pretending to be dead had kept us alive, but telling the truth would finally set us free. The night after that message was the longest of my life, not because something happened, but because nothing did. No knocks, no calls, no sudden footsteps outside, just the quiet hum of the house and the weight of knowing the silence meant decisions were being made somewhere we couldn't see. By morning, my husband had already packed a small bag. "Just in case," he said, noticing my eyes linger on it. I nodded. At our age, you learn not to argue with preparation. Around noon, the call finally came, not from our son, not from his wife, from the older man who had visited us. "It started," he said. "They're unraveling faster than expected." My husband closed his eyes, relief, and sorrow mixing on his face. And our son, there was a pause. He's talking. I felt my knees weaken and sat down hard on the chair. They showed him the evidence, the man continued. The messages, the transfers, the instructions. Once he realized how much he'd been used, he broke. I pressed a hand to my mouth, memories crashing over me, birthday candles, scraped knees, his small hand in mine, crossing busy streets. He didn't plan to kill us, the man added carefully. He believed it would look like an accident, that you'd never be found. That doesn't make it better, I said quietly. No, he agreed, it doesn't. That afternoon, our son asked to see us. Against every instinct screaming inside me, we agreed, but not alone. The meeting took place in a quiet office downtown, neutral and bare, with windows that didn't open and chairs placed too far apart to feel like family. When he walked in, he looked nothing like the man who'd driven us home from the hospital. His shoulders slumped. His eyes were hollow. He didn't sit right away. I thought I was protecting my future, he said, voice shaking. They told me you were standing in the way of everything. And you believed them, my husband replied calmly. I believed I had no choice, he whispered. I leaned forward. You always have a choice. Tears streamed down his face, then real ones this time, uncontrolled and raw. I didn't think you'd survive. I swear, I didn't. That, my husband said quietly, is exactly what makes it unforgivable. The words landed like a verdict. I told them everything, my son said desperately. About the land, about the documents, about who gave the orders. I felt something inside me loosen, not relief, not forgiveness, but finality. What happens now? I asked. He looked at me, eyes pleading. I don't know, but I know I've lost you. I didn't deny it. I didn't confirm it either. Some losses don't need naming. As we stood to leave, my son said one last thing, barely audible. I wish you'd died that day. The room went still. My husband stopped, turned slowly, and looked at him with a sadness deeper than anger. We almost did, he said, and you'll have to live with that. Outside, the air felt cleaner than it had in weeks. As we walked away, I realized the truth we'd uncovered hadn't just exposed corruption or betrayal. It had revealed something far more painful. Our son had survived the fall untouched, but he had lost everything that mattered on the way down, and the final consequences were still coming. Justice does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, with paperwork, phone calls, and doors closing one by one. The weeks that followed felt unreal, like living inside someone else's life. Investigators came and went. Statements were taken. Documents were copied, verified, cross-checked. The land near the mountain, once silent and forgotten, became the center of something much larger than us. My husband told the full story at last, how he had discovered irregular surveys years ago, how money had moved in ways that didn't make sense, how certain names kept appearing, always just out of reach, always protected by layers of respectability. And when they realized, I wasn't going to look away, he said quietly one evening. They looked for another solution. That solution had been our son. Charges were filed, not all at once, but steadily, like dominoes tipping in slow motion. People we had never met began to panic. Deals were offered. Statements were rewritten. Silence, once so carefully enforced, began to crack. My daughter-in-law disappeared from our lives entirely. No calls, no messages. We heard through others that her parents were under investigation too. Their confidence had evaporated overnight. And our son was no longer ours to protect. We were not allowed to see him again. Not for now, not while everything was unfolding. I thought I would break under that weight, but something unexpected happened instead. I felt lighter, not because I didn't love him. I always would, but because loving someone does not mean carrying the consequences of their choices forever. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with my husband, the late sun warming our faces. The mountain loomed faintly in the distance, blue and quiet, as if it had never tried to swallow us whole. "Do you regret speaking up?" I asked. He shook his head. "I regret staying silent as long as I did." I nodded. I understood that too well. We had confused peace with avoidance, safety with denial. We had believed that keeping the truth buried would protect the people we loved. Instead, it nearly destroyed us. That night, I dreamed of the fall again. But this time, we didn't hit the ground. We stopped midair, suspended between fear and freedom. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. When I woke, I realized something important. Survival wasn't the miracle. Clarity was. The world would move on. Courts would decide. Lives would be rebuilt or not. That part was no longer ours to control. But what we had reclaimed was something no one could take from us again. Our voices, our boundaries, and the truth. And as I held my husband's hand, I knew the end was close, not because everything was fixed, but because the lesson had finally been learned. Sometimes, pretending to be dead saves your life, but choosing to live honestly, that's what saves your soul. There is a silence that comes after everything important has been said. It settled over our home slowly, not as emptiness, but as space to breathe, to heal, to remember who we were before fear rearranged our lives. The investigations continued without us. We were no longer needed for interviews or statements. The truth had legs now. It could walk on its own. People sometimes assume that after something like this, you either feel victorious or broken. I felt neither. I felt awake. My husband and I returned to small rituals. Morning coffee by the window. Evening walks when my strength returned. We spoke more honestly than we had in years, not because we hadn't trusted each other before, but because survival strips away all the unimportant words. One afternoon, as we sat together watching the sky darken, I asked the question I'd been holding inside for weeks. "If you had told me everything earlier," I said softly, "would things have been different?" He thought for a long time before answering. No, he said, but you would have been afraid sooner. I understood then. Sometimes love tries to protect by hiding the truth, but truth has a way of demanding its moment, no matter how long you delay it. We never spoke to our son again. That sentence is heavier than it looks. I grieved him the way you grieve someone who is still breathing, quietly, privately, without ceremony. I stopped imagining apologies. I stopped waiting for redemption. Some choices redraw a person so completely that love alone can't recognize them anymore. But here is the part people don't expect. I don't hate him. Hate keeps you tied to the fall forever. Instead, I carry the lesson he taught me at the highest possible cost. That love without accountability is not mercy, it's surrender. The mountain never haunted me after that. I didn't dream of falling again. I dreamed of standing still, rooted, unmovable, while storms passed around me. And when people ask how we survived, I don't talk about strength or courage. I tell them this: we survived because we knew when to be silent, and when silence would kill us. We survived because we trusted each other when the world demanded we trust blood alone. And most of all, we survived because we chose truth over comfort, even when the truth broke our hearts. If you are listening to this and you feel pressure to stay quiet for the sake of peace, remember this: peace built on lies is just another cliff waiting beneath your feet. Sometimes, pretending to be dead keeps you alive, but choosing to live honestly, that is what finally brings you home. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.